48 North Cannabis Corp is a Canadian-based cannabis company focused on the health and wellness market through cultivation and extraction for next-generation cannabis products.
With a conference call at
48 North operates 2 indoor licensed cannabis production sites in Ontario with over 86,000 square feet of production capacity. The company also operates a 100-acre organic farm growing organic, sun-grown, low-cost cannabis. 48 North has signed an agreement with Canopy Growth to supply dry cannabis produced from high-grade, unique genetics grown at 48 North's wholly owned facility, Delshen Therapeutics Corp. 48 North Cannabis Corp is listed on the TSX Venture and trades under the ticker symbol NRTH.
High roll, baby, she is. She's a roll.
Okay, is this on right now?
Welcome everybody to the inaugural #1 first day of the Los Angeles live Midas Letter YouTube studios, Westchester, Southeast, West.
Yeah,
Los
I know you're
Angeles.
far from everything, I feel.
Let's just say the traffic sucks.
Yes, totally.
Oh, my co-host, my mic's up and the batteries are gone.
Well, I got a mic, so James is going to be getting a battery, and he was about to introduce me. Should I just do my
Introduce yourself, Alison. I think you do a great job of that.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm super excited to be here for the inaugural Midas Letter in Los Angeles, in Canada, the epicenter of the cannabis industry. James West is an icon of the digital media endeavor.
I got a question for you.
Yes.
How come I didn't get an invite to the High Times 100 thing?
I can't answer that question. Listen, I want to tell you something.
Fine.
High Times, it's totally an honor that I am one of the 20 women in weed this year, a Canadian, no less.
Congratulations.
So let's just say I think that we had to sort of have a conversation about me getting tickets to the 100 Power thing. And I was kind of like, why don't we just do the 20 women amidst the 100 Power night? Now we go back and do it again just for the 20 women.
Is that, well...
But I've invited you to that.
I know, and it's going to be all women,
all women,
the time.
All the time. What's cooler than that?
Well, I can tell you that it's going to be it's going to be amazing.
Well, High Times is amazing. That's the thing. When I was there last night, the CEO was talking about, High Times, where they've come from, where they're going. They're IPOing, apparently, right?
Have you seen their investor site?
I have not, but I thought it was really cool last night that they had somebody going around with a credit card machine and you could buy shares.
No.
Because they're doing it through Bitcoin or something. I don't know exactly what this is. I haven't had time to Google it. But the CEO got up and spoke, and then I spoke to him after, and it was like, you know what? We would not be here today if not for High Times and the people like High Times. They truly were revolutionary in creating that. And I actually believe, although some would say High Times or our industry is so weird because everybody's going, we're stylish, we're Apple Store, we're not about tie-dye and these things. And I'm like, it was fun like that, but okay, we can be stylish. But High Times has a major brand. I mean, people love High Times, and I think that they'll do really well. I should have put my credit card in and bought some shares.
I couldn't agree more. I actually signed up on the website for $1 million investment just because I wanted to see if that would go through. It asked me to enter my state of incorporation.
Oh, you have to be American.
Well, it was, it would let me do it if I was Canadian, but it wouldn't let me do it in a corporate account. And I was like, well, I'm not putting it in my name, so I get stopped at the border and banned for life by the, they call it the Department of Homeland Security. I call it the Department of Competitive Prevention.
I agree.
That's what they're doing.
I really, really agree. Although I didn't say that. It's all good.
We didn't
it's
say
everything.
that.
You know what? It's just their
cool.
Safety and security
We're happy.
first.
We're fine. Yes.
Yes.
America first.
That's two Canadians taking over America.
America!
But you're going to come Friday night to High Times because, a lot of Canadians actually last night were honored at the High Times event. John Fowler, Peter Miller. Yeah.
I got on the plane
Rosen.
On Wednesday morning, and who's sitting in front of me? John Fowler.
Exactly.
I did an interview with John Fowler at 33,000 feet. I said, John, correct me if I'm mistaken, this is the highest we've ever been while we're doing an interview. He said, I can't argue with you there.
John's great. And it's really nice to see that really through cannabis, and I know this sounds a little hokey or whatever it is, we've coming together, Canada and the U.S. I think we've got a lot of respect for what each other are doing. Very different markets, obviously, but Canada, for the first time in our little history, got to take a lead in an industry, and that kind of feels nice.
It is, warms the cockles of my heart.
It does.
Now, just
but you can't compete with California.
Well, you can't. Certainly can't.
Is that what you're going to segue to California?
Well, no, I was actually going to segue to, I'm proud of the fact that we have that, but then the Prime Minister pulled this fast one with SNC Lavalin, which has nothing to do with what's going on in California, so I'm not going to go there.
No, don't go there.
No, we're not going to go there. But anyways, that made me a little bit less proud was my point. Fuck that, though.
Come on, it's politics. You got to do that stuff.
The thing about California, though, that we'll never get to is we'll never have the ability to grow such amazing weed outdoors in Canada.
I am never going to agree with that. As 48 North is one of the first to have our outdoor application in for an organic farm, and we plan to be one of a handful growing outdoor this season.
You're going to prove me wrong.
I'll put you to the test of that, baby.
I will bring myself as guinea pig.
First of all, what a lot of people don't realize, so where our farm is in Brant County, we are at the same latitude as Southern Oregon. Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
Really?
So, you know what? That's the whole thing. As I go through these investor roadshows, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm the CEO of 48 North, a publicly traded cannabis company. So I come to your lovely country and do these roadshows. And a lot of the American investors are going, you're growing outdoor in Canada? And I go, we actually grow a lot of things in Canada. But Brant County, southwestern Ontario, and Delta, BC are really two areas that you get more of that tropical fruit growing stuff. And that's where cannabis will grow really, really well. So when Canada announced that we could do the outdoor grow in July, we jumped all over that because, as you know, my co-CEO, Jeanette van der Marel, started the Green Organic Dutchman.
Yeah.
She's a cultivator, and her family were the largest apple producers in Ontario. So she grew up in large-scale agriculture, and I think we're going to knock your socks off.
Oh, well, I want my socks to be
organic,
knocked.
which I know is big for you.
Organic
outdoor.
Is critical.
But I know what you're saying. California, the genetics, the history, the richness, it's something special, and I would never take that away, but we'll do some special stuff in Canada too.
So let's talk about California.
Yes.
California has had legal weed in some way, shape, or form since basically 1972.
Yeah.
And now California has a full statewide legislative infrastructure that makes it legal to sell and conduct commerce in cannabis in any sector for any reason, which hats off to California.
Yes.
That being said, we are in a situation where 9 out of the 10 of the dispensaries in California are actually still illegal, which makes it, for the 1 out of 10 that have to actually charge 40% in taxes, remit 40% in taxes, and then also comply with the state rules to keep their license. I mean, we've had several guests here today who are just like, I don't know how this is going to shake out, but it's not really going that well for California.
Yeah, and so I think that this is just the challenge of being in the industry this early for you, for me, different ends of it, your media empire, my licensed producer, empire. It is definitely a challenge, and in Canada it's the same thing. And what is unfortunate is that in some ways, I hope this isn't true, but maybe it's that the deepest pockets win, because how do you, as the 1 out of 10, see through until the black market can be eradicated or slightly eradicated? You got to have deep pockets, because it's hard to compete with the black market. And that's unfortunate, because in California especially, you had so many incredible mom and pop companies doing all sorts of things, whether it was growing or extraction.
Well, you were a mom and pop company in California.
Yeah.
And you sold your cannabis dispensary to MedMen.
Yes, so we had purchased in 2014 one of 4 legally permitted dispensaries in Los Angeles, which was actually in the city of West Hollywood. So West Hollywood was the only sort of municipality, if that's what they're called, to give out 4 licenses. And we purchased one of them in 2014. And that was revolutionary for me to be running back and forth and seeing the evolution of the products go from 30% of sales being the extracted products to 50, and them going from being made by bud tenders, homemade lemon squares, all these things, to Kiva is coming in, Venice Beach Cookie Company, the branded stuff. But again, it wasn't fully compliant in the way, we were permitted, but none of these businesses had to have licenses or lab testing, or, you could sell whatever you could in terms of if they were a patient and all of that kind of stuff. But it is definitely, California's been ahead of the game forever. It's just how do they get through these growing pains?
Yeah. So the whole California thing, I mean, first of all, California, and now let's talk about California relative to Canada.
Yes.
So in Canada, it's almost impossible for a consumer of cannabis to buy cannabis from a government vendor and receive cannabis that is within the time frame of optimum best before date. Yes. And that is one area where, I don't know, unless we change the rules in Canada, we'll never compete with California.
Well, I mean, it depends what you mean by compete. I don't imagine that Canada will allow the import of products from California. So Canada has, as you know, higher per capita weed users, and so they want to get product, and so their choice in Canada will be, and for my lifetime, I imagine, black market or legal market. What I think you're talking about is the brands, really, right? So,
well, no, it's actually the fact of the matter is, for example, there's a little video that I'm not going to play right now, but a guy got delivery of a cannabis container from a cannabis store that's government run, and it said 5 grams, and he opens it up, breaks the seal, puts it on a scale that he zeros for us to make sure there's, there's no, and it's 2.8 grams. And what does that tell you? That tells you that from the time they actually weighed into the package and sealed it and sent it off, it had lost almost half of its weight in moisture.
Well, first of all, it shouldn't have had the moisture to begin with in that packaging, because there could be other problems that arise for having moisture, like molds or things like that. So the shrinkage should happen on your drying if you're drying properly, and then you package it. That's a whole other story. But what I guess I'm saying is I don't disagree with you that there are many problems in Canada, and you pointed out some in California. But it's not that we have to worry in Canada about competing with California, because the Canadian government is not going to allow, as far as I could see in the near to far future, the import of cannabis from the United States, nor would the United States allow that either. So the question is, will Canadians turn to the legal market, or will they stay in the black market because of these problems? And then in California, what I see as the challenge for us as Canadians is their ability, as I said, to truly build big, big brands. And so Canadians, shocking, are on the internet as well, right? They're reading the papers, they're online, they're on social media. They want these brands, they're seeing them. And so how does that play out in the Canadian market? Are we going to be able to compete on brand, or are the US companies just going to come in and go, we'll take your license and produce our brands here because nobody knows your stuff? I don't,
Well, we talked to Jake Heimark, the CEO and co-founder of Plus Products, just a short while ago, and here's what he had to say.
Plus Products, Inc. is based in California and manufactures cannabis-infused edibles, which it sells to both the regulated medicinal and adult use recreational markets. All products under the Plus brand are made with high-quality ingredients and produced in the company's dedicated 12,000 square foot food-safe cannabis manufacturing facility in Adelanto, California, staffed with chemists and food scientists. Plus Products, Inc. is listed on the CSE under the ticker.
Jake Heimark, CEO and co-founder of Plus Products, joins me now. Jake, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Jake, in the context of California, we're seeing that still 4/5, or roughly thereabouts, by estimates, is of the cannabis purchasing by retail consumers is from the black market, not from legitimate sources. What's the deal?
It's a huge problem. Last year was the first year of recreational legalization in California, and the estimates were that the total market was going to be on the legal side about $6 billion. It ended up around $2.5 billion, and the only difference in the discrepancy was that less converted from the black market to the legal market. It's not a good thing for the industry if we actually want to grow up and help this plant become something that's mature and people understand, and it's not safe for consumers. So it's a big problem.
Sure. So is that figure relative to medical consumers buying medical product, recreational consumers buying rec product, or right across the board?
It's all of the above.
Really?
There were more than 1,500 dispensaries in 2017, and last year there were only around 600 licensed. Only around 300 of those were operational according to the state. That means there are a lot of dispensaries that are still operating from 2 years ago that haven't been shut down. They're unregulated. Consumers don't know if those products are safe. And it really puts a bad spin on the whole industry down here in California.
So why does a cannabis consumer, either medical or recreational, want to go to a black market source when they've got a perfectly legal source right on the corner?
Well, most of the time they may not even have that source, and they may not even know. One of the hardest problems with these illegal dispensaries is that it's impossible to tell whether it's state regulated or not because the state's not shutting down those who are actually breaking the rules. Second problem is taxes are wildly high, and estimates as much as 25 to 40%, depending on the jurisdiction, end up hurting the consumer. If you can go down the street to a place that looks just as nice, but it's 40% cheaper for the same product, it's a hard sell to get them into the legal stores.
Wow. So isn't that a major threat to the legal industry? I mean, if they can't compete with the black market's not being shut down, then isn't the black market going to put the legitimate market out of business?
It's an existential threat to the future of this industry everywhere that it's happening. That's here in the US, that's in Canada, that's as we look to other jurisdictions as well. If we don't figure out how to create a safe, regulated market for consumers, which is most, or at least a lot of the argument for legalization, we are not going to have a successful industry here.
So why is there an absence of enforcement?
Two reasons. One, there's a lack of regulators because they haven't staffed up appropriately here in California. It's very hard to hire that many people that quickly. The second is the way that taxes are dispersed here in California. All these taxes go to the state, and the local jurisdictions and the local enforcement actually aren't having the budgets to go after and help the state doing enforcement. As those regulations become clear and as that money starts to flow to local enforcement, which are a few propositions that will help make that happen, we'll be in a spot where we can actually start regulating.
Mm-hmm. So then by regulation, that means arresting people who are operating unlicensed facilities, charging them with marketing marijuana illegally. Sounds to me like we really haven't decriminalized it at all. We've just recriminalized it and exempted corporate dealers in cannabis.
So there's a wide gap between arresting people and starting to shut things down. And that starts with notices. It starts with telling people what the rules are and making sure that customers actually know them. But then I believe that you do have to start shutting things down and putting people in jail. If you are not a regulator who sees someone who is deliberately taking millions of dollars of product and moving it across state lines, that is so far from what should be allowed in California that regulators and law enforcement actually needs to get involved. If you're someone who is maybe not following the testing rules or you're having difficulty getting the local zoning permit, we're talking about a different issue. And both are going on right now, and there's a big difference between those type of actions.
Mm-hmm. So from your position as CEO of Plus Products, you are essentially focused on edibles.
We are.
And does this issue affect your ability to conduct your business profitably?
Well, there's a good news for edible companies, which is that people generally don't feel comfortable buying edibles from their corner dealer. That feels weird. It's a saran-wrapped brownie and it's unregulated.
Like candy apples at Halloween.
Exactly, or lollipops sold in a park. Those aren't the brands that we're competing with. That said, it is a real threat to our growth. If 2/3 of the market is happening outside of these regulated channels and we're not in that part of the market, it's a huge opportunity for us because people, when they go to regulated legal dispensaries, they start to consume different types of cannabis. They start to think about the entire market differently. And that's actually not just important for revenue growth and opportunity for companies like us. It's actually a whole industry branding issue that we need to address if we want to push toward federal and international legalization all over. We need to get this right.
Mm-hmm. So what can the regulators in California do right now to start to move it in the right direction?
They need to start noticing companies that are open and operating in violation of the California law. They've started to do that, but what they haven't started to do is actually shut them down. As they start doing that, the word will spread quickly. This is a very small industry where people talk a lot. A little bit of enforcement would go a long way. And as regulators start to do that, I believe we'll start to see some changes. Now, when does that happen? I don't know.
Okay, so the question now remains, if you take away 4/5 of the supply by shutting it down, is the remaining legitimate supply enough to service the demand that's going to materialize on the legitimate side?
There is a lot of supply here in California. We've been medically legal for more than 20 years. That won't be true of every jurisdiction where there are black markets, but here in California, we have a very large supply chain that we'll be able to absorb. The reason why people are often going outside of the supply chain, where they even may have a regulated farm, for example, is because the taxes are so high on the farmers who aren't making much money anyway, that if there's no incentive and enforcement to actually put them through the regulated channels, it's just not going to happen. Taking a 20% pay cut because you want to sell in the regulated channel when it's just as easy to sell in the unregulated channel is not something that is an easy sell to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. So I got to think that these illegal dispensaries are operating much as legitimate ones. They're advertising, they're having specials on this versus that, they're bringing in different products to incentivize increased purchase per consumer. I mean, how do you compete with that when you don't have the burden of taxation and compliance on the side? I mean, I don't understand how the legal cannabis vendor on the retail side can possibly survive.
Well, let's talk about what the legal side does do really well. And the answer is we use testing. We have compliance. We actually make sure that it doesn't have pesticides. We make sure that if the dosage on the outside of the product says, in our case, 100 milligrams in the entire tin of gummies, that it actually has somewhere within 95 to 105 milligrams. There are products you can buy in the illegal market where the outside of the package will say one thing, but the inside of the package is something completely different. So that is a place where we compete. That said, some enforcement would really help.
Right. Okay, so Plus Products, you guys recently announced financials. What do they look like?
Yeah, we announced our guidance towards our finishing of the year last year. So we are finished with about $3.2 million in revenue in Q4, which is great. That's up from about an 800% growth year over year from Q4 the year before, which is great. We went from an edible company that was about 12th or 15th in the market to one of the top ones. And anytime that you see that kind of growth, the thing that happens to many companies is product quality starts to slip. We focused entirely on product quality. We actually didn't do much marketing. We didn't really have display stands, and we didn't spend a bunch on our sales force. We found that last year was the right time to make those investments, and this year we're starting to actually get some of the other things under control as well.
Right. Okay, so what's the most popular product?
Our most popular product is called Uplift. It's a sour watermelon sativa gummy. It has a sort of nice daytime feeling. It's also the product we sold the longest, and it's a top seller in California across everything, vapes, tinctures, edibles, everything else by unit. It is the thing that people go back to and buy the most. I think that as a branded product company, it's really important to focus on owning a piece of somebody's shelf at their home. You need to have something that they go into the dispensary or the delivery service or however they procure it, and they have a spot for it in their home, and when it's not there, it's missing. I don't think anybody, including Plus, is there yet as a brand, but once you start to get there, that's when you can actually drive traffic from one retail store to another. Or in the case of Coca-Cola, when somebody says, hey, I'd like a Coke, and they say, is Pepsi okay? The customer says, no, it's really not.
I'll go elsewhere.
Exactly. And that's
give me a Coke.
That's how you build a brand. And that takes time and it takes consistency. And some companies, for example, they'll have like 150 products that they're going to manufacture in 15 different jurisdictions. I'll doubt many people at those companies can even name all those products, let alone the customer understanding how that all ties together. We only make 4 gummy products at Plus, and that sort of focus and consistency has led to the repeat purchase rate at Plus that we're really proud of. 70% of our revenue in December last year was from customers who had purchased it before. That means that there's a huge opportunity in bringing new customers in as well. But when you have that kind of loyalty and people have that habit of purchasing it over and over, that's how you really build the brand that you can eventually have brand premium, drive shareholder returns, and actually have that affinity for the product that makes consumer product good companies have a much different multiple than other types of companies.
You bet. And the proof is in the financials. It seems like it's working for you. Jake, we'll leave it there. We'll come back to you really soon. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hi.
But so, what do you think? I mean, that's his perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that he addressed. I think the black market issue, as we just said, is definitely a challenging issue. It's a robust black market, and it's accessible, and they'll deliver it to you in a minute. And I think the job of all of us, whether we're Canadian or American licensed companies, is to educate the consumer, as he's saying, what could be in your product if you are purchasing from the black market, understanding that there's molds and cat hair and maybe urine and, you know, do you buy
what
food?
do you mean? Who pees in the marijuana? Come on.
I'm just saying that I don't say to you, open a store and go buy the cookies that somebody made in their basement.
True.
You want to know that the government or somebody.
But harken back to a time when the only source of cannabis was people who grew it in basements. And as a former basement cultivator, I can assure you that we took great pride in making sure that we rinsed off all the Pocon that we'd sprayed onto it moments before we cut it down. And because we didn't know.
Terrible. I think it's an education piece. It just is. And ultimately, people want to be able to get what they want in a legal way, and for the right price and the right dosage. And it's just going to take time here in California as well as everywhere else.
Don't you think the government should butt out of the cannabis business? Like, really? What? Give me one business that the government has ever run successfully.
Listen, the government of Canada is my partner in my business.
Oh,
and they, you know,
love the government of Canada.
Listen, you now are running this country or Canada, whatever you want. You are now going to have to go into legalization. Can you begin to imagine how complex a job that is? Thinking about these edible products, are they a food product? Do we have to test them in the same way we test these other things? Vape, we don't even have an e-cigarette strategy because these things like Juuls came out of nowhere before there was any regulation on them. I mean, it is a monumental task, and your phone is ringing every day with little old ladies saying like, what are you doing? There's a weed store on the corner of my street, and I just can't even imagine the job they have. But at the same time, of course, I believe that cannabis should be accessible to everybody, and I'm not scared of it. So if it wasn't in the hands of the government, they wouldn't have to take those calls, and they could be like, that's not our problem.
But
that's industry's problem.
It's a plant.
It's a plant. I agree.
It's a plant.
I agree.
I don't think that there is any moral authority on Earth or above Earth or anywhere in the universe that is morally justified in telling you what you can do with a plant that occurs naturally. That's my bottom line.
Philosophically, I agree with you, but we are realistically moving from prohibition to legalization, and we live in a world where everything moves super fast, and all of us are doing really well, and we have money to spend, and we just want our company to be there. And it's just not going to happen that way, and maybe that's not a bad thing. I don't know. I mean, I often say, Johnson & Johnson didn't wake up one morning, whoever that is, Mr. Johnson, and say, I'm going to be a global conglomerate. I mean, they started with probably the baby shampoo, and then people were loving it in one store, and it grows and it grows. Cannabis is the only industry I know where people wake up in the morning and go, I'm a global conglomerate. I know what it takes to run a facility. 2, soon to be 3. When I think about some of these MSOs and other companies who are just acquiring and now running these facilities that are, you know, distressed assets, I'm like, I don't know what that looks like in a realistic business way, right?
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So
Even
that's
here
a
in
good
Cali.
point, though. You know, here we've got the government-regulated, corporatized cannabis industry running roughshod all over distressed assets, cobbling them together, and it's like, now I ask you, would I rather be buying my cannabis from a guy down the street whose garden I can see from my upper window in, call it Monterey, call it anywhere in Humboldt County, or would I rather be buying it from this stressed out, maniacal, corporate, conglomerate, ambitioned sort of subset of humanity that wants to issue super voting structures to make sure that the shareholders don't have a vote? I mean, it's like...
Okay, but you've gone to 2 extremes. Somewhere in the middle, there's companies like 48 North and other companies in the U.S. who are legal, but they're very focused. And that's what I've always talked about with you. And I agree with you. And I think that you can be that. The global companies, these, you know, the man, as you're describing it, will have their place because they have their place in alcohol. I mean, some people want... I shouldn't say any names, but, you know, Absolute vodka, and some people want that potato distilled whatever, you know, cow-fed, hand-fed vodka. That
handmade vodka. Tito's, isn't that? Actually, there's a business that the government's been very good at.
Yeah.
making alcohol overpriced so that they can lop off the biggest share of the
James
price tag.
James is going to kill me. Kill me, okay? He is killing me. Okay?
You call yourself a libertarian?
I
real
don't
libertarian.
call myself a libertarian.
Oh, you don't?
You call yourself a libertarian.
I call myself liberal, which is just another way of saying I'm free, baby.
I just call myself realistic. Like, it's not going to not be regulated by the government. So what is the best way we can play and make great products for people? And in California, too. I was shocked going into the MedMen store that we used to own on Santa Monica Boulevard before it was MedMen. There was a lot less products than there had been in the past. And I realized it's like people are having a hard time getting on shelves. The lab testing, I'm sure you've heard this from other guests, is backlogged. And that was kind of sad for me because California was always like, whoa. And I brought my team out for this High Times Award. And I was like, no, usually there's like, you know, I thought they were just going to be blown away in California and Los Angeles by the amount of product. And they're, I mean, look, there's a lot of product, but it's not the walls of it that it used to be. Right. So that's sad because some of those were great companies and they're probably just having a hard time meeting those requirements.
To your point, and I have been sort of tormenting you with devil's advocacy, but you know, I really sort of look at the effort being made, and the deepest pockets to some degree need to win because that's why deep pockets are here. And it is growing pains. It's growing pains. I mean, this industry in the Canadian context didn't exist 5 years ago. In the U.S. context, has never existed federally. Yeah. So this is, I mean, it's amazing that we've got it to where it is.
It is amazing. And you know what? In time, especially in Canada, people think, okay, the valuations are crazy, but you have something like 80 full licenses. I mean, there's more with cultivation, but full sales licenses, right? That took us 5 years. California, I don't know how many they've issued, but at least 1,500, 2,000 since they've been legal. So, you know, the thing is that people say, well, will there be room for mom and pop shops? And of course, if you look at Colorado, and you could, if you were a resident of Colorado, have a great idea for just an edible, right? And get the right licensing to just do that. Obviously in Canada, we've got this massive license that allows us to be completely vertically integrated. And that's really all we had until this micro stuff is coming along. But the hope I have, and I'm sure you do too, is that in time there will be room for anyone who has a great business idea or product that they want to create in cannabis to be able to do that and not, you know, just have to sell to someone who got the license early. California too, I have lots of friends here with great products, and I really hope that they're able to sort out some of those challenges. I don't want to see these businesses go under.
No, I know. That's, well, you know, and here's the other problem I perceive in the American industry is because in the states where it is legal, the approach towards letting the market decide means that there's an abundance of licenses and an excessive supply of cannabis. Oregon, for example, we know has got 100% more cannabis than is being consumed or that there is demand for. And what's that doing? That's squeezing the little guys out. That's causing them to fail. And that's really the tragedy because then they do become distressed assets. And who's sweeping up the distressed assets? The guys with the deep pockets who are, you know, probably less interested in the welfare of the client at the end of the day, though that's probably, I don't mean that to say that I'm impugning the character of, anyways, you get my point.
No, but, and you know what's really interesting about what you're saying? As you were speaking, I'm like, okay, cannabis is a very strange industry for sure. People compare it to tech. I never think it's like tech. Because one of the things about tech, that bubble and the emergence of the YouTubes and the Google and the Facebook, well, then they didn't exist while this bubble was happening, right? So cannabis is really this first massive, huge hype industry that's not new. It's just being unwrapped out of the black market in an era of this social media and all of this. So it's exactly what we're saying. It's like our brains and our needs and our wants as business people, as consumers, move super fast. But like industry doesn't just go that way. So it's amazing to think about prohibition of alcohol. After the end of prohibition, 95% of the companies that existed then do not exist today. And I think it's really fascinating, but we run at a pace. Like honestly, I've been going since 7:30 this morning. I'm supposed to be like working, but sort of vacation, not vacation. I'm here to get the award, but it just, we cannot stop.
Well, but also let's talk about 48 North a bit because Your stock has been on fire.
I know.
And it turns out that you've been marketing hard to groups of investors, and it's obviously having an effect. What is the main value proposition for 48 North that you project to institutional investors that differentiates you from the rest of the pack?
So very quickly, profitability. We just, the last 2 quarters have been EBITDA positive, which are the first 2 quarters post our sales license. So focus and profitability is a big message. I'm not running 12 facilities, 20 million a month overhead. We believe we can dominate the female market with what we've got going in our facilities, and the outdoor grow is a huge part of that. Having this 100-acre outdoor farm, which is about 3.4 million square feet. You know, the cost at 3 cents a gram wet, it's game changing. And we won't be the only ones, to your point about Oregon, right? We might be one of the few in 2019, but the first mover advantage, and this even exists in Oregon because there's some companies I know out there, if they were the first and they have great relationships with their clients and suppliers, like there's no need for that person to change. So you get the opportunity to sign those deals and sign those contracts first. Then you have to deliver, and that first mover advantage is really, really huge. But the low-cost organic outdoor, profitability, focus on the female market, really authentic brands. To your point, we're not the man. Jeanette and I are 2 female CEOs of a public company, very rare. We're both cannabis users, and we're the real deal. So, you know, that's what 40 North is about. But it's amazing because the U.S. investors are just like, today I said I was in LA, and there was about 50 brokers, and I was just in Dallas 2 days ago. Dallas, I said, anybody who's invested in cannabis or understands the industry, raise their hand. One person. Today I said, in Dallas. Today I'm in LA. I'm like, guys, I'm so excited. I get to skip the whole thing. How many of you invested in cannabis? I know you're all going to raise your hands. It's California, LA. 2 raised their hand. I was like, okay. So again, you and I are in it. We're like, what's going on? But here are these people who are just starting to think about it as investors, and so new companies will have that opportunity to, speak to them.
You bet. Well, that's one of the interesting things. The cannabis industry, some people who are in it like to think that the industry is mature and fully valued, and that what you said right there is proof positive that not only is it not fully valued, we're still still in the first inning. Yes, exactly.
Infancy. And like you have done an amazing job, I want to say, because really it's the ability to have the platforms to talk more in depth. It's like these sound bites. It's really hard. And so for me, we're talking about California. It's so complex. We couldn't even do this in an hour. And I can't even imagine the average investor trying to understand where they're going to place their bets. Like, it's actually scary to me to think about what you could say to them, and they would not know differently. And I'm honest to a fault, but it's infancy.
It is.
And you're doing the good work.
Well, so are you.
Are you coming Friday night for everybody to see?
Woo!
All right, Friday night, James at the High Times Women in Weed event.
I'm going to go and drag just to make the ladies feel comfortable.
No, it's not an all women's event. We're just honoring the women, and the men are there to honor the 20 women.
I'm going to go naked and really give the ladies a thrill. No,
James,
okay.
Hashtag I say it every time. Time is up.
All right. Coming up next, we're going to talk to Afzal Hasan, another long-term player in the cannabis space in California and elsewhere, and he's with Origin. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Make sure you never miss a show by subscribing to our YouTube channel and clicking on the little notifications bell. If you're interested in getting monthly actionable investment ideas in the cannabis space to your inbox, subscribe to the newsletter at midasletter.com. Joining me now is Afzal Hasan, President and General Counsel of Origin House. Afzal, welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me again.
Yeah, Afzal. So in the context of our new California, Los Angeles presence, we're interested in spending today's episode on all of the issues facing the U.S. cannabis space broadly, and specifically California, where it is generally acknowledged that somewhere between 1 in 10 and 1 in 5 companies are actually operating legally. The rest are illegal and are previous guests opined that this was an existential threat to the industry in its entirety, because how can a legitimate industry exist along one that can sell its product into the market at a 40% discount without the burden of compliance? How does Origin House approach that?
It's obviously a challenge to running business over here. I mean, that's been probably the biggest factor over the past year and a half that has held back growth and development in the market, or at least that's what people point to. The assumption being if you were able to convert all of that illegal activity into the legal market, you'd have a lot more legal sales, a lot more tax revenue, a lot more growth all around, and that's the very simplistic interpretation. Challenge is that it's a pretty deep consideration as to why we are here, and there's a few factors that are at play. Enforcement has been one of them, and based on what we understand about the California government's view, they've been careful about enforcement because they don't want to have a chilling effect on the industry. What's been very challenging in this industry, especially in California, is the fact that you did start with a patchwork of regulations that were very local over the past 20 years. Many of those transitioned somewhat abruptly and with some challenges into this legal market, but many operators that were operating in the so-called gray area that believed they were operating compliantly and thought that they had a shot in the legal market found themselves combating local counties as well as regulators that were challenged in issuing them with licenses. So LA, for example, biggest example of that. We see a lot of illegal shops over here and very few legal. And this is because of a number of reasons, but it does have to do with the fact that local licenses have been very slow to come out. So a lack of distribution points has been challenging, and coming back to my point about enforcement, the government has been reluctant, at least from what they've indicated to us, to come down with a sledgehammer on operators that are operating outside of a license framework, because many of them have been trying to actually get their licenses and operating in as much compliance as they can. That doesn't mean that the majority of them or all of them or even a substantial fraction of them are in that boat, but this is the same principle that underlies our justice system. You don't want to go out there and punish even a small fraction of people that are innocent because that actually is a very chilling effect generally on society. So that's been a big holdback, the regulatory side. The other side is price and consumers. One of the major things that I tell everybody is that you cannot blame the consumer for choosing what they believe is a best purchase decision. So if they go into a shop and they're not getting what they want at the right prices in a legal store, then they will go to an illegal store. And on a lot of levels, that isn't the consumer that is to blame. It's the ecosystem, the environment, the industry, and the infrastructure as well. So that's where we've been focused. Actually offering consumers the choice between something that they want to purchase in the legal market and what they don't want to purchase in the legal market. So what that means really is price. Over the past 6 months, we've onboarded quite a number of brands as a distributor that go at it with a very low-cost strategy. And they're low cost compared to what you see on the shelves today, but the reality is when we take a look at the numbers and project into the long term, these companies probably reflect what stabilized or even maybe slightly higher than stabilized prices might be. And this wave of companies, they're coming in, they're actually making very little, if almost no money in some cases, and sometimes negative margins on their products. They're coming in and setting the standard for what this industry needs to be. And what's really important about that, all of a sudden you now have products that offer a viable alternative for a customer that would have otherwise gone into the illegal market. And really that's the way that you combat these types of issues. And if you can take all sorts of examples in the real world, like ivory, for example. A lot of fake ivory is being put out into the markets purposefully, synthetic ivory, in order to collapse the market for illegal ivory. And that's similar to what we're trying to achieve as a distributor over here, is offering consumers the options that allow them to convert from the illegal market into the legal market.
Through price.
Exactly.
So do you think that the state of California would be best served by adopting a more lenient approach towards taxation at this stage of the game, allowing market share to build on the part of legitimate producers by allowing them to compete with these guys by not taxing them now? I mean, it seems to me that the whole argument for legalization was in large part driven by this argument that, well, California, if any state, needs the boost in tax base. And so this is a good way to do that. Yes, possibly true, but let's not rush to the cookie jar and eat all of them right away. Let's let the cookie jar get some cookies in it. So it sounds to me like that might be a better approach than enforcement, where you're just through brute force shutting down those who are not compliant.
Absolutely. I mean, and selfishly, we're in business, so my answer is generally going to be the lower the taxes, the better, regardless of whether it's this ecosystem or any other. But your point is definitely accurate, and there are signs that the government is aware of that and has been pushing forward. So there have been proposals around lowering the cultivation taxes pretty significantly in this industry over a period of time that lasts, and then they jump back into effect. I think the government is cognizant of that. It's certainly challenging too, because a lot of, I gotta imagine, a lot of the political momentum that was utilized to get these legislative measures passed was based on exactly what you said, a lot of tax revenues. So to go back to many of the politicians that were involved and to say, you know what, we're gonna claw back on the taxes, puts them in an awkward position where they promised their constituents that are in their jurisdictions that we're gonna get a lot of tax revenues and so forth. So each one of these problems are it's so complicated and intricate, more complicated made by the fact that California was operating in this crazy patchwork for 20 years. So in theory, yes, but I think their ability to do that very quickly, cleanly, and effectively is limited in a sense, but moving in the right direction.
In Canada, the drive towards illegitimate sources of cannabis, which again occupies by estimates 80% of the retail spend. The perception is that that's driven by the fact that the quality of the cannabis provided by legal producers is not sufficient to satisfy the retail consumer, and that's a result of legalization and this huge arc of time that has to exist for marijuana to be compliant to get to the consumer through the government sources. It's got to be tested, it's got to be approved, it's got to be shipped, it's got to be stored, it's got to be, by the time, I mean, we have a saying in Canada, there's no such thing as premium dried flower arriving by mail, which basically says that there's no good legal marijuana. Now, all of the cannabis starts off fine. There's no qualitative issue at the point of harvest, sale, package. It's just that long arc where it's, there was a great little video I saw earlier where a guy opened up a brand new package that was supposed to have 5 grams of marijuana. He put it on a scale and it had 2.8 grams. And it's like, well, there you go. It's like almost 50% of the weight has evaporated from the time they put it in the package and weighed it. What does that tell you? It's spending too much time in transit and in storage and in all those different processes. Is that qualitative issue at all a factor in California?
Oh, certainly. I mean, we have to deal with it a lot as a distributor because we are that central part where product is coming in from a manufacturer and then it's being tested, quarantined, taxes are being collected, we're finding the right retailers to buy it, et cetera. So that is our bread and butter, and one of the most sensitive things for us as an actual company is that lag time between getting a product in and getting it to the market, because shorter that is, the better it is for our manufacturers and for us as a business. So that's the core of our business too. It's something it's not a new challenge though. I mean, if you think about how many products there are that are shipped across the world literally every second that are so spoilable that they need to be either frozen or refrigerated or whatever else, and this is not a challenge that is a hard one necessarily if you have mature infrastructure and people that are experienced in this area. Cannabis, unfortunately, it's a relatively new commodity, has aspects to it in particular relating to the freshness and the quality that people are still trying to grapple with. Over and above that, if you take Canada, for example, you made the statement that the cannabis that's being harvested is good in some level, or it starts off good. And that is something that I'd highlight anecdotally hasn't really been the case for a lot of consumers that are out there. If you take a look on the reviews that you see online, there are countless cases of people that have moldy cannabis or cannabis that has been infested with all sorts of problems or issues. You can take a look at some of it. It's barely strung together. The bud structures aren't there. It's just not viable as a product, et cetera. And that's a symptom of, again, inexperienced cultivation. This is all stuff that will be worked out over time. But the key part, and I've been asked recently about, and this basic question, why is it so hard to buy good legal cannabis? And the reality is that you need 10, if not 15 to 20 different business functions to work perfectly in order to get a great experience on the shelf for a consumer. And we're still in the very early stages of that. So it's not just distribution, it's the cultivation itself. Moreover, the genetics too. The genetics pool that we have in Canada, especially when you go out in California and you try and compare it there are new strains coming out here every week. The breeding that has been done is just insane in comparison to what's happened in Canada, because Canada's been all clandestine, no tracing, no tracking, and no real strategy to any of that. Also dealing with a very limited gene pool. So I could go on for hours literally talking to you about why this has been a problem over there, but it has to do with just all these functions needing to work in perfect synchronization and at 100% efficiency in order to get that optimal experience to the consumer.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So do you think that Canada's approach, which is different to California's, which do you think has the better chance of actually delivering a quality product to the consumer at a satisfactory price in the nearest term?
Well, California's does, but it has an unfair advantage in a sense, because it's had an industry that has been operating in a pretty unique fashion for about 20 years. So what's happened during that 20-year period is that, I mean, if you take 2017, for example, we had anywhere from 1,500 to 3,000 dispensaries was the estimate. So just thinking about that, the retail infrastructure in California was so advanced and well developed. And then behind that, obviously, there were distribution channels that were servicing those stores. And behind that, there were obviously cultivation sites. There was trained labor, people that have been doing this type of stuff for years and years, cultivating, trimming, processing, extraction, etc. That head start and advantage is insurmountable for any other jurisdiction, especially when you consider the size and scale of this market too. By many estimates, it was supplying the vast majority of the US in past years as well. And so the knowledge base, the infrastructure, and the maturity that you had within all of that was a huge advantage for California. It did come in with a huge challenge too, which was the fact that it was the Wild West for 20 years, and to try and regulate that, they had to take a very unique approach, and that's led to exactly what we're talking about with the illegal market being a very big negative factor. But that's one of the costs that California has paid, in a sense, for having this massive advantage. So coming back to Canada, I think they're doing a great job in trying to regulate this. It is an immensely challenging subject area to try and regulate. But unfortunately, that maturity just takes time. The regulations need time to mature. The industry needs time to mature. Staff need time to mature. Business strategies need time to mature. Operational facilities. I mean, growing cannabis in these types of climates with this type of infrastructure just hadn't been done before in greenhouses. All this stuff, it just takes time. And I think that's something that you can't look to ever short circuit just because you've got federal legality or not. It has to do with a lot of factors.
So you sound like you're generally optimistic that that things, despite the problems, are on a good trajectory, and that we will overcome these issues, and that we're looking at a brand new day on the horizon for cannabis users everywhere.
And it's not rocket science. I gotta emphasize this. What we are talking about is cultivation of a plant, and then processing that into products. These are things that happen at scale and with huge precision in a multitude of industries. The only thing that's new over here is that we haven't done this with this plant before, with these products, etc. So there's that maturity period, but for anybody that thinks that this is gonna be hard or difficult or impossible into the future, I mean, that's not something that you should ever rest a business proposition on in this industry, because every one of these basic functions is going to be figured out, and frankly is being done out in the real world and legitimate world with other types of products at a scale and efficiency and productivity that's much better than what we are in the cannabis industry today. So I have absolute certainty that we'll get there. It really is going to be a matter of time. The real thing that people get really excited about, and where all the money is, and that's where the $1 million or $1 billion or $1 trillion questions are, is who's going to do it first? Who's going to win? And that's where it's almost impossible to predict.
Well, Origin House is certainly a contender.
We're trying.
All right, Afzal, as usual, a fountain of knowledge, and I really appreciate your input, and we'll come back to you in due course. Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Let's talk about Aurora. Recently, your financials, you've more or less delivered.
Here are the headlines moving markets today.
If you're lucky to buy it 3 days ago at 37 cents,
and I think it has a lot to do with some of these smaller names giving.
Welcome back, guys. My name is Or. It's a Hebrew name. It's just O-R. There's no W-H in the beginning anymore. It's one of the most common names, like Or. It's one of the most common words in English, but people keep hearing it and get confused. Like the other day, I went on a date and we wake up and the guy was like, so, Or, huh, is that your real name? And I'm like, what the fuck is that supposed to mean? And he's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I thought it's like short for something. And I was like, that's so interesting. It's exactly what I felt last night when you took off your pants. It gets especially weird in comedy clubs, because like the comic before me and the comic after me freak out. They always look at the lineup and they go to the booker and they're like, what do you mean Jerry or Sebastian? Who the fuck goes on? Like I said, my name, I have a Hebrew name. I came from Israel. I came to America because I wanted to find myself through comedy, because the acid didn't work. But now that I'm in California for 3 years now, I can honestly say I feel Americanized, because from this unexplainable reason, all I want to do all day is smoke weed, get fat, and go to Target. It's all I want to do all day. I just like, and I find myself paranoid at Target. It's like paranoid at Target is my favorite thing to do. Like in Israel, you're paranoid because we are the target. I tried to quit smoking weed lately. And let me tell you something, I don't recommend it. It's hard. The hardest thing I'd say about stopping smoking weed is the moment I realized I'm just lazy. It's not the weed that was making me lack spirit. It's my spirit that lacked spirit. Like some people are pro-life, some people are pro-choice. I found out I'm just procrastination. I'll definitely say that it's weird for me to smoke weed here, because the other day I understood that as an immigrant, the weed that I'm smoking has a better legal status than I have. Like I was with my friends in a car and there was a police stop point and they were all freaking out, but from different reasons. Like most of them were like, oh my God, where are we gonna hide the weed? And my one girl was like, where are we gonna hide ore? Like this is California, the only undocumented thing in this car was me. So my friend Rachel, and who's ever watching, please don't judge her. She goes, oh my God, I have the best idea. Last time this happened, I just hit the joint inside the cigarette box and nobody was even able to tell it's not a cigarette. So what if we just have ore sit between Jessica and Veronica and pretend she's not an immigrant? So I just sat between the two girls and pretended to be a white American. I just played with my hair and chewed gum and pretended I knew nothing about geography. Anyway, guys, I'm running out of time in this country. Next up, we have James gonna talk to Jason Glasgow, the co-founder of Phoenix Tears. Here we go.
Jason Glasgow joins me now. He's one of the founders of the Phoenix Tears Group. And I don't know exactly what that is, but Jason, you're gonna tell us, what is Phoenix Tears?
The Phoenix Tears. Well, it started with Rick Simpson, and a lot of people know about the Rick Simpson Oil. So Rick Simpson is a part of Phoenix Tears, and along with Janet Sweeney, who's the main founder of the organization, and myself and Dr. Bob Malamud, our primary focus is education. Mm-hmm. We've been doing this for about over 12 years now. So when we first started, there wasn't much information of how cannabis oil could be used to mitigate or fully control or destroy different diseases like cancer. So I've been, Janet focuses as a caregiver on most diseases and illnesses. My main focus has been on cancer. Mm-hmm. So we have what's known as a Rick Simpson oil, and it's a very high grade, very pure cannabis oil that patients would orally take through the instructions of a caregiver like myself to help them start at an appropriate dose and then go up to what we believe to be the therapeutic dose for them. Mm-hmm. So it's education and a network of caregivers that help patients that are in need.
Sure. Yeah. So we live in an era where cannabis was removed from the pharmacopoeia back in 1952 under very suspicious circumstances that smacked horribly of corporate self-interest.
Yes.
Fine, let's leave that alone. We're moving in the right direction. But you've also got doctors right now who are saying that cannabis is not a legitimate approach to cancer or any of these things. Opiates and that ilk are, because we have the data that proves.
Yeah.
And, you know, all of us stand back in horror and say, yeah, we have the data that proves it's addictive and destructive. And they will not acknowledge, they seem to defend the destructive nature of opiates and that ilk with this, you know, this reference to the data guru god thing that is really irrelevant when you consider that the anecdotal experience of people who experience improved outcomes or a better quality of life in the final stages of an incurable cancer completely mitigates anything that the data has to say. So how do you see this proceeding given this resistance from the big pharma lobby?
It's interesting. I think we're definitely at a tipping point. One of my mentors, Dr. Bob Mellamy, he's a founder of one of the first publicly traded companies called Cannabis Science. And the research with their company was on HIV and AIDS, and as well as cancer using cannabis-based therapies. And he defines a class of people, blips and flips. So there's backwards looking people and forwards looking people. And he believes that we are well beyond that tipping point. The information's there. Our Run from the Cure video has been viewed over 100 million times, the Rick Simpson story, since it's been put out. When I first started to work as a caregiver under and within Phoenix Tears, most of the patients that were coming to us, it was their last resort. They were stage 4, they saw a video, there wasn't much information. And what I've seen over the years is that the first line of defense or attacking this cancer, they're coming to us to seek care and you know, and guidance for that. So I know we're well beyond it. There's hospitals now that are embracing this therapy, that are doing research. Raphael Meshulam's been on the front lines definitely, since the 60s, doing his work. And another mentor, Janet Sweeney, has been doing this for about 3 decades. You know, very lowbrow, underneath the radar, because that's how she had to do it in order to survive and not have any attacks, like Rick Simpson.
So she had a personal experience that caused her to come into this knowledge, I guess.
And a lot of us do. With mine, I lost my mom and dad to cancer. So I was always looking, and people seem to always gravitate towards me that were suffering or had cancer. And I owned some dispensaries in Southern California, and I had a biochemist. He brought in the oil, and he's like, this is RSO, and I didn't know what it was, so I researched it. And then one of my friends is a movie producer, and back in the 70s, he ran an ad on the cover of High Times. So I'm like, Bill, can we contact the owner of High Times? We need to get to this guy, Rick. And Rick was already indicted. He was somewhere in Czech Republic, I believe. So we got a Skype ID. That was my first introduction to Rick. And he was paranoid because of his current situation. By the way, all charges have been dropped. So he's a free man. He can travel anywhere he likes. But he said, I can't really help you. This is my position. And he directed me over to Janet. And I was going through labs after lab of different oil, trying to find the right quality. Janet's very stern. It's got to be this percentage. It's got to be pure of solvents. So finally, I found the right oil, and she said, well, please come in. Want you to work with us with Phoenix Tears. And it's been hundreds of patients later. I've led doctor studies, and it's amazing. The country is waking up. Look at what Dr. Sanjay Gupta did on the Weed series.
Absolutely. Martha Stewart, too.
Martha Stewart. She's
Snoop Dogg.
Yeah, Snoop Dogg. So there's a huge tipping point. The success we see it's overwhelming. I mean, it's unbelievable, some of the things we see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you can't say that, I mean, because of the laws, you can't say that Phoenix Tears cures cancer.
No.
But can you give me some anecdotal examples of individuals who have experienced during the consumption period where Phoenix Tears was a part of their daily regime, where they have gone into partial, full remission or even completely eliminated the disease from their body?
Yeah. So my first cancer was, it was a skin cancer. So we applied the oil, covered it, and about 12 days later, we saw the cancer was disappearing. And it eventually, we destroyed the cancer down to the root. So I was hooked from there. One patient that comes to mind, her name is, well, I won't give her name, but she had 26 tumors in her body. She was definitely end stage. I arrived at her house around 11 o'clock, and she was ashy gray, in and out of consciousness. It looked like she was like about 7 months pregnant. So we were very aggressive on our treatment. She was a cannabis user pretty much her whole adult life. So we actually started her on a very high amount of cannabis. The next morning, complete shift. She was lucid, most of the swelling had gone down, color was back in her skin, and she's running around now over 2 years later without cancer. So, and it's just, there's many, many stories just like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me about Phoenix Tears itself. Is it a strain of cannabis that you grow specifically for this, or is it more an approach to cannabis concentration purification?
We have some strains that we really like to use, but once you extract the medicine from the plant, we generally look at different levels of the THC content or the CBD content. And we've been doing this so long now, we can look at a certain type of cancer, one that may be hormone sensitive, and we can adjust how much THC or CBD we want to use for the therapy. So the main focus of Phoenix Tears, it's not a specific oil. We haven't branded an oil then. I mean, of course, the Rick Simpson oil, everybody's heard about that. So, you know, and it's widely used. But it's really just about Phoenix Tears. Our main purpose is to advocate for the plant, to spread and educate people, and then help network people that can, people suffering that can attach to a caregiver that can bring them through a therapy. Yeah.
Now, is there a charitable organization to which individuals who want to support your work can contribute?
Yeah, there absolutely is. It's called the PhoenixTearsFoundation.com. And about a year and a half ago, we actually made a decision to launch a for-profit company. So it's headquartered out of Las Vegas, and we have a line of CBD tinctures, and 35% of the proceeds of any products, Phoenix Tears products that are sold, go back to the foundation. So to date, we've donated over 20,000 grams of oil to people that can't afford it.
Right. So, so I'm just curious. I do generally, today actually I didn't, but generally each morning after breakfast I do 1 milliliter of CBD concentrate that I get in Canada, and it's got 48 milligrams of CBD per milliliter is the listed.
Nice oil, yeah.
Yeah, it's really nice. It tastes great. Like, it's gotten to the point where just thinking about it, my mouth starts to water. Seriously. And I've noticed that what it does for me is it, like, first and foremost, rampant ADD, gone.
Yes.
Can focus, concentrate, something pops up, I can ignore it. Or I can look at it and remember what I was doing 5 minutes ago, which is a miracle. Hasn't happened to me in 20 years. You know, all other things, like after a strong physical workout, the recovery time of muscles and connective tissue seems to be shorter. Gastrointestinal, you know, continuity, despite, you know, social events where you might eat and drink a combination of, you know, a lot of bad stuff that would give me heartburn at 4 in the morning and put my liver into overtime, and I wouldn't sleep very well that night. Well, CBD takes care of that.
It's wonderful, amazing. Yeah, I'd love to hear that. It works when we have a system in our body called the endocannabinoid system, and it's about upregulating that system, and that's something that the compounds in cannabis help to do. Once that's done, kind of like homeostasis, and your body has in a position to fight back or fight against chronic disease and illnesses and things like that. So, I mean, I consume. I'm healthy. I have a maintenance dose of cannabis oil. I do. It's good preventative, and I think the whole world should be on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I also read a statement by, I can't remember who it is now, but he said that, you know, a lot of people who are, you know, suffering from depression or anxiety are generally suffering from a CBD deficiency.
Absolutely.
Which can be brought on by any number of things, and is easily remedied by just the smallest dose of CBD. So can you imagine going through this period of your life where everything is depressing, the world is over, and you find out that all you need to do is this one little drop of this pleasant tasting CBD oil with 0 side effects, and I mean 0.
Yeah. And
your quality of life is back, and you're happy, and you're, like, I just can't understand what is going on in the medical community that it's like they're using data to resist the understanding.
They are, and you're exactly right. Phoenix Tears has supported vets for a long time, and I've worked with vets who came back from wherever they're, Afghanistan, couldn't leave their house, had such anxiety even to walk out of the house, and we've began working with them. They're leaving the house, they're living normal lives, and yeah, it's wonderful, the benefits you see. And even if I'm working with a cancer patient and they have another illness or condition I never even knew about because I'm focused on the cancer, and they'll call me back and they'll say, hey, I've been suffering from this for X amount of years and it's gone. So, or it's controlled or alleviated.
Right.
So yeah, it's amazing. It's wonderful, yeah.
Well, that's amazing. We're going to leave it there. I'm going to talk to you again repeatedly, and we're going to have numerous conversations. But for now, we'll leave it there. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk about Aurora. Recently, your financials, you more or less delivered.
Here are the headlines moving markets today.
If you're lucky to buy it 3 days ago at 37 cents,
I think it has a lot to do with some of these smaller names giving really...
Recreational cannabis is here. It's quite dry. So I'm going to eliminate the stocky bits. So, what'd you think? That's our first show, live from Los Angeles studios here at YouTube. And we are going to start doing shows from our YouTube studio partners in London, Berlin, Paris, Tokyo, Dubai, Mumbai, Rio de Janeiro, and New York. So stay tuned for that. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, hit the little bell button. You know the routine. We'll see you next time. Actually, come and see the rest of the studio. Let's get the hell out of here. I mean, it's time to go. I got a plane to catch. I got to be back in Toronto by 3:30 tomorrow afternoon. Thanks for watching, y'all. Bye.